Okay, so please start taking your seats. We'll be starting the session. So let me call the speakers to the podium. Constantijn, please take a seat in the middle of the table. Vint, can you please take a seat? There. Gabriele, can you come? John, can you come up? And where is Marty Cooper? Did he go out of the room? I guess we'll have to get him. Okay, so can I ask if the doors can be closed now? We start the session. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is the Marconi Symposium, which is the major event for the Marconi Society. Every year, the Marconi Prize is delivered to a personality, someone who invented a device, an algorithm, a protocol, or a system that had a great impact on the world. And the symposium is a place where eminent speakers come, give their own view, and then the winner gives a keynote speech about his own invention. So this is what is going to happen today here in these 2 hours. And the theme of this Marconi Symposium is how telecommunications are a driver for creativity and innovation and progress into society. And in fact, society has been transformed by information and communication technologies in a way which was not foreseeable, and it's also impossible to go back now. We need this technology, and this is part of our lives. I have a wonderful panel of speakers here. I will introduce them shortly and then afterwards when they speak. But just starting on my right, we have Vint Cerf, which you have met already during the conference of these 3 days. Constantijn Oranje is head of cabinet of Madame Neelie Kroes, the vice president of the European Commission, and he's also the Prince of the Netherlands. Gabriele Falciasecca, the president of the Fondazione Marconi. And then on his right, we have John Cioffi, who was also a Marconi Fellow. He's a Marconi Fellow and the inventor of the ADSL technology. And finally, Marty Cooper. I don't need to introduce him as he's the honorary guest here at the table. We will start off with introductory remarks by Gabriele Falciasecca. So Gabriele, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. You see that in the program I was planned for the closing remarks, but at the end it's very difficult to have the conclusion, so I prefer to introduce something. And well, I think that it's really a good thing to have here the Marconi Symposium inside the conference dedicated to the creativity. We have heard the necessity of creativity and innovation, and in the conference some speakers were very clever in introducing the relationship between creativity and innovation. So in the title we see here telecommunication as a driver for innovation. So it's very important to deal with creativity, which is the first step in order to have innovation. For what concerns the creativity, we have heard also many different definitions of creativity. So in my mind, I reminded the word of Agostino, our religious philosopher. In the Confessioni, Agostino says about the time, oh, well, I know very well what is the time, but if you ask me, what is the time? Oh, really, I don't know. So creativity is a word we use and is a very interesting word, but I think that we have to work to define more, or perhaps it is not really definable in a complete way. But in any case, we know that after the creative action, we can have innovation, and we need innovation in all our activities, in all our countries. There is also another interesting reason to have Marconi Fellows here and Marconi Symposium for those who are researchers in the field of creativity. Creativity is a matter of humans. Not a matter of nature. If you remember the words by Karl Popper, great philosopher of science, Karl Popper says about the science of nature that we have to do some crucial experiments, and these crucial experiments are questions we pose to the nature. Usually the nature answer no. If you sometimes, maybe, in a rare occasion, yes. And if the answer is yes, then we can improve our knowledge of the nature. Well, I think that here you have in the fellows the equivalent of the nature for the creativity. So there is a great possibility for the researchers in the field of creativity to ask directly questions to the creative people who are, for example, the Marconi Fellows. This is a very lucky occasion. If you are, for example, an entomologist, and your purpose is to study butterfly, you cannot discuss with the butterfly. But in this case, you have the possibility to discuss with the fellows who are creative persons. So it's a very important occasion. And I think that this discussion was already done in the past days, and in some situations we had some let's say, divergent opinions about creativity by our fellows. Not always the same idea of creativity, sorry, and what we can do for improve creativity. So it's a very interesting point. Finally, my voice says that I have to finish. Finally, I have to remark that one other important point we can do in order to study the creativity is to look at creative histories in the past. And we have a man, Guglielmo Marconi, who is really a good example for, let's say, finding something true or not, if we refer to the speeches we have heard. For example, in Marconi, you can see the moment of the limited but sufficient exposure to the basics of electromagnetics. Without this exposure, it was not possible for Guglielmo to do anything. But then there was a period of about 2 years when Marconi was completely closed in the lab, and he did an individual work, perhaps against the world, since at that moment the general ideas were not the ideas Marconi tried to demonstrate true. So there was this period, and then a long period when Marconi used the context, the activity of groups, the scientific community, and this is the moment of the great innovation. Marconi in that period invented other things, not only the wireless telegraphy. Marconi was inventor of many other important things we use or use in a transformed way. So I think that Marconi Fellows, Guglielmo Marconi, scientist, creativity is a very good combination, and I used at the beginning of this conference the word serendipity. I hope that this will be a serendipity, and also for our future we will use this serendipity in the proper way, or we hope to have serendipity for the life of us and of our new generation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gabriele. This leads perfectly into my own little speech, which will be used by the other speakers also probably as an inspiration for some of their lines. We want to just show you some pictures. I want to show you some pictures about Guglielmo Marconi, and as Gabriele said, use him as an example figure for one way, because there's not a single way to create new ideas, but one way which is exemplary in many terms. Well, first of all, the start. As Gabriele said, he was a very young man, was about 20 years old or less than that, tried to enter the University of Bologna. Oh, he failed the admission into the University of Bologna. And so the academia, first of all, my fault, did not let him become part of the community. So he was trained by a tutor and self-trained by reading the magazines of the time about electromagnetics, the work by Hertz, and so on, working in his own laboratory inside Villa Grifone. And I will show you this picture, which is from the museum of Guglielmo Marconi. This is inside Villa Grifone, so some of you have already seen this museum. Some of you could have the chance to see it today or in the next day. So if you have the time, take your time to go outside of Bologna. It's about 20-25 minutes drive, and see this museum where the room, the so-called Stanza dei Bachi, where Marconi was working at the time, has been reconstructed. And there is the window out of which the first obstacle, which we will talk about in a minute, was surpassed by the radio signal. So Marconi was there. He was not at the core of the field. He was in the periphery, for sure. He was not the expert. He was very young. All of these elements are important, but I want to say that even if you're not young, if you're at the core and you are inside the system, you can still be creative. Why is it that it's so difficult to be creative when you are an expert at the core and not young? Most of it is because of reputation. You need to be free to make mistakes without hurting your reputation. Once you take away that barrier, and David said that it's a curve. There's a moment in time in which you're very free to make mistakes, you're young, then your reputation builds up and you start to be a little more cautious. Then in the end of your career, you're so famous, it doesn't really matter. You go back and have new ideas again. And I think that is true. So Guglielmo was for sure in that place of his life where he could try, he could dare. And what if Guglielmo Marconi was born in a house in a plain with no hills? He had no opportunity to, see any obstacles. But in front of him, in front of his house, you open this window and you see La Collina dei Celestini, Celestini's hill. And that was a challenge right in front of him. Let's try to see if the radio signal can go beyond that. So the real invention, in my eyes, of Marconi is not radio, because we know many people had worked on that, many other solutions, yes, but range and going over obstacles, the system to go beyond obstacles, the antenna, the overall system to go far and beyond visibility. This is the real contribution of Guglielmo Marconi. Now, he must have had a lot of passion to do that, because he had been rejected by the university, my fault again. He had little information, but he was really determined. So drive, focus is the initial state of creative thinking. You need to have a focus, an objective, and you need to have very strong motivation, which will not be put down by the events, which will not be easy to face. Now he wants to go real far, cross the ocean. Now he has to build very large premises, goes to Cape Cod, the winds are there, it's winter. He wants to do that in the winter. And all the antennas break down. So he puts up kites. But at the time, the physicists did not know about the ionosphere. They only knew that in the far field, the rays were traveling in straight lines, so it was mathematically impossible to go across the ocean. And he was there building these sites, broken down by the winds in the cold, and it was not put down by that. He was putting up kites to bring up the antennas. And he managed, notwithstanding the fact that he was listening to all the lightnings around the world. At every moment in time, there are about 1,000 lightnings, and since he was using a super wideband signal, just a spark, a super wideband signal, he was listening to everything that was happening. Not much interference, not too many people using, there was no cellular telephony at the time, no reuse of frequency, but a lot of lightning. But still he heard the dots and the letter E that came across the ocean. He did that, notwithstanding what other people were saying, notwithstanding the fact that experts were rejecting his own approach and his idea. And he had to face a lot of resistance, not only from the press, but also from other companies. So now you come out, you had your idea, you've proven it to yourself that it works, you have to prove it to the world. And that might be one of the most difficult steps, to prove it to the world. The Marconi Fellows, in general, they are not only we look at what kind of invention they made, but what was the impact on the world. All of the Marconi Fellows had an impact on the world. And Marconi had to convince everybody else in front of the fact that the Anglo-American Telegraph Company had a patent and a right to connect Europe and America for 50 years, but they started in 1854. So their license was ending in 1904, and Marconi was doing the experiments at the beginning of that century, of the past century. So he had to say that it was just experimentation, no commercial, nothing commercial there. And once he did that, proved that it was possible. I've shown you this on the opening day, but not everybody was here. The paper says, Marconi says he has received them from England, this signal. Yes, but who are we to believe that that is true? Because the letter was prearranged, so he knew what he was supposed to receive, and he says he has received that. Now, how do you convince the world? You need to be marketing-oriented. You need to be marketing-oriented. So the best way is to get famous people, important people, to use the system. And so he managed to have Theodore Roosevelt send a message to King Edward in England, and he received a message back from them. And now all the physicists had to shut up, essentially. How can you say that this is impossible since we are starting, well, let's say a political or a commercial service out of that? So it is entirely possible to do that thanks to the ionosphere. And now let's talk about luck, the sheer fact that it's important to be lucky, to be also an inventor that has an impact on the world. Now you all know about the Titanic and the fact that radio was a way in which a large number of people was saved thanks to the SOS signal that was sent once the ship was sinking. But you might not know that Marconi himself was supposed to be on the boat. He was supposed to be on the boat, but did not do that because he had other last-minute engagements. So he was also very lucky, and that is an important element. A man with a destiny and a leader. Once you are a creator and you want to have an impact on the world, you have to convince other people. In the end, you're for sure a leader. So creativity and leadership are tied together. And people start having faith in you, and even your little child has faith in you. And he was on his boat Elettra with his daughter. The daughter was trying to thread a needle, but she has this father and is the god of wireless. So she says, Dad, when are you going to teach me to sew without a thread? Threadlessly, the wireless god. And the daughter really believed in him so much that she wanted to get away with a thread. Is that possible? Actually, that seems to be just a crazy child idea, but today we have thermal ways to put cloths together without a thread. So actually, we were forecasting the future there. So he was visionary, not only the daughter, but also himself. He was somebody that could see into the future. I will read it fast. Well, I will not read it. He was forecasting the advent of the use of radio, not only to distribute information, but also for instruction and recreation. So he saw the application of wireless communications for recreation and for instruction, bringing everybody in a synchronous mode, aligning the culture, aligning the ideas. This is an essential element of the industrial society, where everybody needs to think in the same way, like the same objects, have the same taste, in order to have a mass production and a mass sale of products. This is an essential element of society. But not only that, he says broadcasting is great, aligns our minds, but the next step, the real value of radio, is in point-to-point, two-way communications anywhere, anytime. Does this sound like a commercial from some telecom operator? Yes, it does, but it was said by Marconi in 1937. So Marty, I don't want to disappoint you now with the next slide, but mobile telephony, the cell phone, maybe Marconi did that already. Here it is. The first, this is the first mobile radio terminal. Oh. Okay. But not the same size as the one by Marty. So Marty did something which was great as opposed to that. I would say this is maybe the first vehicular terminal that was developed by Marconi, and still not a very small one. But he really saw into the future, and the final slide is that he saw all of this for the benefit of humanity. And the Marconi Society has this as its motto, pro bono humanitatis. So we do all of this in a spirit of tolerance, sympathy, solicitous of exploiting the achievements of science and human ingenuity for the common weal. And this is the real significance of his contribution, and it's also the real significance of the conference. We're talking about creativity, idea generation. For what? What are we doing this for? For the benefit of humanity. That is the end goal. So I thank you very much for your attention. Okay, so now I leave the floor to Vint Cerf. Vint, please.
Is it all right to speak from here? Yes. It's on. Well, it's my honor to represent the Marconi Society in this part of our session. I'm vice chairman of the society, and I start out by observing that we are formed to celebrate inventive thinking and entrepreneurship in the spirit of Marconi. The organization was founded by Gioia Marconi Braga, his daughter, who brought to it enormous energy and creativity. Really, Marconi is an icon in communications, and his story reminds us that research is all the more powerful if it can be put to practical uses. So we're encouraged by Marconi's ability to achieve constructive applications emerging from basic understanding. I have to tell you that when this symposium, not only the Marconi Symposium, but the Creativity Conference was announced, I had some trepidations about this because studying creativity reminds me of trying to explain humor. You know, it's deadly. And I have to say, I was very, very surprised and pleased to discover that there were all kinds of very interesting ideas and experiments, and I've come away now with a variety of things to contemplate as a result. So I really appreciate our being a part of this joint activity. I would note that Marconi's work was over 100 years ago, and he was too young to know you can't do that. And I'm surrounded by people like that at Google. They're all too young to know you can't do that. So they all go 900 miles an hour, and they try various things out. And I think that a lot of the Marconi laureates are, in fact, like that. They're too young to know you can't do that, or they deliberately stay young, thinking along those lines. The other thing which I think Marconi illustrates for us is the importance of patience and persistence, something that I think every one of you would appreciate, that if you are not patient and persistent, if you don't believe in what you're doing, then you may not accomplish things. Marconi clearly overcame many obstacles. I was struck by your comment that he had trouble getting into the university. If I remember right, Einstein had the same problem. Exactly. There must be something about these creative individuals that don't fit into the normal educational mold. So we should be looking for those people. The other thing that's very important about all this is the ability to make predictions based on your understanding of behavior. And surely that's the essence of engineering. If you can't make a prediction, then you're not sure exactly what it is you've designed, what will your design do. And so getting enough understanding to predict behavior is really important. Now, Bob Kahn and I think, have benefited greatly, in some sense, from Marconi's invention. And certainly from our Marconi fellow, Martin Cooper's work. The mobile phone and its smart descendant has transformed the internet and the World Wide Web from stationary access to access on the go at any time. Access to the world's information on demand and access to the myriad applications found on smartphones has augmented the internet in very dramatic ways. And I can't emphasize enough how interesting it is that these two systems have come together. The smartphone is clearly a very powerful device. It's one that has a lot of processing capability, and yet most of its interesting applications involve the use of the computing power and content of the internet. And vice versa, the internet is augmented dramatically by the fact that you can get access to it from anywhere. And these two things mutually reinforce each other. I think it would have been hard to predict how powerful that's turned out to be. But what's especially interesting are the social, economic, and political side effects of mobile access. These side effects are still being felt. We're still learning how to anticipate and how to cope with the social and political aspects of mobile internet. Those of you who follow the politics of the world know about the so-called Arab Spring. And although some of my colleagues were pounding their chests saying, look how powerful we are, look what we did with our technology, my reaction is, you don't always know what happens after a revolution, and you can't always predict exactly what the outcome will be. In some cases, it doesn't work out too well, Egypt being an example of that. So we shouldn't be too proud of this. We should be much more concerned about what happens when you engage this kind of socially dynamic system. Well, maybe it's just not predictable, and maybe we'll just have to live through this social, economic, and technology revolution to find out how to assimilate this new information universe. The Society celebrates entrepreneurial elaboration of research and the people who lead us into new territory. The list of fellows stands as a monument to Marconi's aspirations and accomplishments, and it reminds us that there is still a great deal more intellectual territory to explore and to understand, and we will hear more about that in the remaining session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vint. Now we move on to a view from the political institutions in Europe. Europe, as many other countries or continents, is moving for a digital agenda. So policies which are oriented towards the introduction and the exploitation of the technologies that we are celebrating here today. And we have Constantijn van Oranje here to talk about that. So the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, turned it off.
You had it right the first
time. First of all, I would like to apologize for Ms. Kroes, who wanted to be here, but she was called away to a ministerial meeting in Vilnius. So it's the other side of Europe, but she's with us today, and she greets you and asked me to present in her name. And as I was sitting in the back listening to the presentations this morning about creativity and seeing so much creativity, it did make me muse about what creativity means in policy making, because I sometimes get the feeling that all our processes are designed in such ways that any creativity gets killed in the process, and we don't really want people to be too creative when they sit in seats of power. But then I thought that probably we have to have the creativity to actually move around or through the processes that kill creativity to come up with at least some outcomes that can defy the incumbent interests and maybe induce some change. And thank you, Vint, for giving me putting some words in our mouths. They're too young to know that you cannot do that. That's something that that would apply to Nelly too, but she's not so young. She's actually 72, and dealing with a topic that is highly dynamic and always changing the economy, changing our society. So maybe you should add to that. Some people are old enough to know that you should always try. Now I'd like to deliver Nelly's speech. Today we're here to celebrate Martin Cooper and his achievements. The mobile has transformed our lives. But with many innovations on the horizon, that transformation is certainly not over. I want to reflect on that and how and the actions. So Europe plays its part on that, and the actions that Europe can take to play part in that transformation. And I don't need to tell you how significant the mobile has been for our world. For hundreds of thousands of innovators, sometimes no more than teenagers, making a living from mobile apps and games. To people in Nairobi slums using mobile banking to send and receive money. Its ability to both stimulate innovation and enable and empower people, that is unprecedented. Martin's big idea set off an avalanche. It was the first in a sequence of ever slicker, more sophisticated devices, gadgets, and services. And I remember a picture at Rand Corporation of 1953, where there was a scientist in a room full of equipment, and he said, one day in 50 years, so 2003, all of this will actually fit in someone's home. And he didn't know that it would fit in your pocket. Today's smartphones are the grandchildren of Martin Cooper. And I'm going to be a bit chauvinist now for a minute to talk about what this means for Europe. Because often when it comes to today's digital innovation, we look somewhere else. These days, the queues outside the store are for a new gadget that almost certainly is designed and manufactured outside of Europe. And the same often goes for the services, the software, and the social networks they use. Yet Martin's ideas remind us of a time in the 70s and the 80s when this wasn't the case, when Europe and America shared and built on each other's successes. His first ever cell phone call in New York in '73 was completed by countless European inventions in the field, like the GSM standard, text message, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. Martin Cooper took his place among the great names in telephony, many of them European: Marconi, Rice, and Bell. Companies like Bell and Motorola shined alongside Nokia, Ericsson, and Alcatel as global stars. So my question is, where are the Marconis and the Bells today? Where will the next Martin Cooper come from? Will it be Europe? And to policymakers, that question actually matters. Not just for the innovation themselves, not just for the ICT sector in Europe, but for the entire European economy. Today, digital tools are the home of ever more innovation. Telecoms has transformed our lives. Now, even more so, from cloud computing to the Internet of Things, e-health, e-learning, smart cars, and smart cities. ICT is a technology that could soon underpin everything we do. ICT companies are among the biggest in the world, and they're ever more heavily scrutinized and commented on. This innovation shows no sign of slowing down. If anything, it is accelerating. Soon we could have not just computers and phones, but billions of objects connected and sharing through the Internet of Things. And so I hope the answer to my question is yes. I hope Europe can rejoin the world's digital leaders. And we certainly have the talent, and we see that obviously in this room today. Because every day my boss and I meet startups, entrepreneurs, and young talent and innovators across Europe. And seeing their dynamism and determination, then you realize Europe has the people and the energy to succeed. But those entrepreneurs need the right framework. It needs to be easier for them to scale up their business and develop their ideas. Because even when they start in Europe, they often don't stay in Europe. So it's less likely that the next big thing will be European. And we lose out on all the benefits to innovation and the creation of jobs. In a few weeks' time, the European Council, this is the gathering of the heads of government and state, will meet specifically to discuss the European digital economy. And the EU's 28 leaders and the Commission will discuss particular telecoms and online innovation. They will talk about how Europe can support that innovation and regain that strength and leadership. And I'd just like to take you through a few examples of things that we can actually do and we should be focusing on. First, we can invest in tomorrow's technologies and in the sectors that are significant for our economy and strategic for our innovation in the future. Let me give an example. And I give it because it might just be Martin's great-great-grandchild. It's the next generation of mobile technology, 5th generation or 5G. That's something that could give you sound quality as good as hi-fi, internet access everywhere at gigabit speeds, connection for all kinds of sensors and intelligent objects. Thanks to the Horizon 2020 research program, 1.2 billion euros of public and private research funds will be mobilized to put that 5G vision into reality by 2020. That's just one such strategic investment. And alongside that, the EU is looking at public-private partnership in a range of areas, from electronic components and systems that sit inside the latest devices to high-performance computing that can help us understand the human brain or build the cars of tomorrow. Second, we want innovation, and we need to support the innovators. With few entry barriers and no limits to creativity, the web is an amazing place for new ideas to develop and grow. But those entrepreneurs need the right environment to succeed. And there's a huge community out there of entrepreneurs in Europe that are willing to take up the challenge. You know, over a century ago, we discussed it already, a 20-year-old entrepreneur set off to London, accompanied by his mother, to seek support for his work. That young entrepreneur obviously was Marconi, and we are all glad that he succeeded in his tasks. And those audacious and talented young people are still around, and today we're meeting them regularly. My boss met one, a 14-year-old boy in Berlin, and she likes this anecdote because she tries to tell our leaders that, you know, you have to look for talent everywhere. And this boy was there with his father. And so she first started the conversation with the father, and he said, no, you don't talk to me, it's my son is the entrepreneur. And he had already started 2 companies, but he needed his father to sign his checks. And it's time to stop putting barriers in the ways of these entrepreneurs. And it's time for politicians to listen and recognize that this is a contribution that they're paying to our economies, and we should be supporting them. Why? Because they matter for our future, and it's also time to let them speak up. So this is actually what we tried to do by calling a group together of European leaders. We call the Leaders Club, and they have developed among themselves a startup manifesto. It's a call to action and includes many ideas of how to make Europe a better place for startups, a place to nurture our great talent. And many thousands have already signed up to it, and I hope that across Europe, policymakers and politicians will take the time to read it and act upon it. My third point is that all innovations need telecommunication networks. Broadband that is fast, reliable, and pervasive. And broadband boosts growth. We know that 10% points more penetration would be worth 100 billion euros in EU GDP. Yet, at the same moment, we're missing out. Today, European citizens are less connected than those in many parts of Asia, America, and even in Africa. And there's a huge opportunity for the European telecom sector to come up with new, innovative services that can underpin our future. I'm sad to say that Franco Bernabé is not going to be here today because he was supposed to talk about the creativity in the telecom sector. And it's true that we need that. We need to be more dynamic, and we need more investment in infrastructures. And we would like to have heard about his creativity, because the telecoms or situation in Europe is not one that would be characterized by creativity, where we're seeing most of the innovations coming through over-the-top players. But to be fair, the telecom sector in Europe also needs the right market and needs the right regulatory framework. Because as it stands, we don't have that market in Europe, and barriers constrain European telecom services, and the roaming charges are holding back citizens and businesses, and multiple spectrum systems are creating barricades for operators to roll out their services across borders. Today, telecom companies lack the skill to innovate and invest. And as I said, we are stuck in legacy models with the innovation happening mostly elsewhere. And our role as policymakers is to allow the change to happen and remove those barriers. And we'll help telecom companies to become European, to think global, to be digital, and to compete at the global level. This will give Europeans a chance of enjoying high-speed, innovative services for new broadband networks. And that is why the Commission has proposed measures to make Europe a connected continent, with the legal framework to ensure European growth, fairness, and leadership in broadband and ICT. Like Martin Cooper, we need to look ahead. That's the prism through which our proposals need to be assessed, not in relation to the comforts of the past, but to the opportunities of the future. The crisis is not an excuse to postpone the structural reforms we need, nor to stop investing in our economic competitiveness. On the contrary, we must dare to be bold. Connectivity and the flow of data are the new oil powering and enriching our economy. We cannot let vested and incumbent interest stop us from tapping that well. And that is why I hope that EU leaders dare to take a look forward and to capture those opportunities. And I hope that when they come together, this will not be a summit of fear, looking about the dangers of big data, but one of opportunities and the future of our economy. Martin Cooper had a great dream about the future of technology. Who could have thought the mobile would become anything other than an expensive elite novelty, or that the internet would change the world as we know it? Sometimes when you set out, you don't know exactly where you will end up, but you know that you're heading for somewhere good. And that journey that Martin made is highly relevant for us today as we contemplate the technological changes ahead. And only now are we seeing the true consequences and the true potential of that change, what the mobile, connected world means for our economy and society. But we are all immensely grateful that Martin and his colleagues had the courage and took the leap. In future, people will likewise look at the decisions Europe's make today, and they will ask, were they bold? Were they strategic? Did they anticipate or enable the future? Did they safeguard European success as a connected continent? I hope the answer will be yes.
Constantijn, for this realistic view of the European situation. Now I want to add one objective to creative design, which is sustainability. We know that today we are more and more concerned about the future of the entire planet, and so we need to make the best possible use of the resources that we have. And is this constraint killing creativity, or can you work with a constraint? Now, the next speaker is one of the best living examples of the fact that you can make the best use of available resources and be creative at the same time. Suppose you have the telephone network and you want to use that for broadband access to the internet. Is there a solution there? Yes, that is ADSL, and that was invented by John Cioffi. John, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And let me maybe a little less historical and try to actually pose a solution to some of the problems that were suggested, innovation and creativity, and how do we continue to do that, specifically within the area of telecommunications. So the title here, Software-Defined Access Networks. You've heard of software-defined networks, I think many of you But I'm going to focus on the access part of that and suggest some thoughts that may help with some of the specific problems that were brought up just a minute ago by our speaker, Prince Constantijn. Let me first just tell you what I mean by access networks, my outline here, and then investment. And many of the previous speakers talking about the importance of actually getting things into use. And of course, they have to be financially viable in order to enter use. Getting that involved in your innovation is often very important to the ultimate use. And then finally, competition and innovation and the effect that it has on that investment, specifically, again, for access networks. So what is an access network? I have the internet cloud up here, and of course, it's just transformed life for all of us. But the access networks are the connections to things out there. They could be wired, can be wireless, increasingly wireless, and thanks to Marconi and his early work, many of those these days. An increasing number of things, and you have to get in and out to and from the internet, and it could be people. It could also be things. We're hearing more and more about the Internet of Things as we proceed. And how big is this, and what is its effect on telecom? So here I put a little pie chart for you to see. The actual access network, roughly at about 35 euros a month. I'm using euros here since we're in Europe as the currency. It does work out to about 1 trillion euros a year worldwide that is actually spent on access charges. About 3/4 of that is in the area of mobile. There's about 2 billion active mobile users. If you actually look at numbers, you'll find numbers like 6 billion or so, but the number of active subscriptions is about 2 billion. So that works out to about 750 billion euros a year. And fixed line, maybe smaller, 25%, but still a very large number. 250 billion euros are spent worldwide on access network connections. So very important segment of the industry, and this is more than half of all the total revenue in telecom, the other part being, of course, the business revenue, or what's called enterprise. And what you're seeing on the mobile part, very important trend, it's unlicensed spectrum in particular, but Wi-Fi, almost approaching 50% of the devices that are going in the field, these active mobile users, have a Wi-Fi alternative. And many of you are very familiar with that. You may switch to Wi-Fi on your smartphone whenever that may be convenient for you to do. There's a lot of reasons. You think of them individually. Maybe it works better, or you perceive it as being cheaper, or a number of other reasons for that. And there is an explosion of that type of thing going on, particularly in the residence or the home, if you like. Typically have a wired connection into some kind of gateway, but increasing use via Wi-Fi connections to all of the devices or the things, if you will. Sometimes they're connected to a human being. Sometimes they may not be. If you actually look, and this number comes from the United States, which is actually ahead in the number of connected devices per residence now, but the rest of the world rapidly rising too. The numbers from some of the big service providers already in the United States are 12 connected devices per fixed line home. Very large number. So if we took that 250 billion euros, if you will, or the 700 million connections you saw on the last slide, multiply by 10, okay, or by 25 is what is predicted here in a few years, and you're up into over 10 billion connections that are actually flowing just as shown here. Big part of access. So huge numbers involved here. And even more important, perhaps, is there are now more connected devices in homes than there are people on the face of the earth, and headed upwards from that. Now, if you actually look at the breakdown, this data comes from Cisco, the breakdown between the different segments of data in internet use. The dark area down at the bottom there is fixed Wi-Fi, and the lighter blue area is fixed. And then the mobile data, okay, surprisingly, while that's growing, all this perspective on mobile data and how big it is, it's actually, that's the licensed spectrum. But the biggest part is the part that's being offloaded to Wi-Fi. And often that's because of video. Okay, people doing over-the-top video, that uses a lot of data, and so forth. Another interesting graph, and I have to kind of explain it to you a little bit. This is an interesting one we found. You can find it on the internet, but it basically shows you the growth of the iPad and the iPhone since inception. Okay, so for the iPhone, of course, it's 2007 would be year zero, and the iPad, I believe, was 2009 in terms of its introduction. And the red part is the tablet. Okay, this is a device being used in a home. So it's eclipsing the smartphone in terms of the amount of use or the number of users, the amount of sales that are going on in that. So this is giving you an idea of that offloading to Wi-Fi. Even more important here down at the bottom of the screen, if you look at all the tablets that were sold, okay, recently, you see that 80% of them were sold without even having a 3G or a 4G connection on them. And if you look at that 20% that were sold with that connection, actually only 5% of them are active. So the vast majority of these devices are actually working on Wi-Fi, not on the licensed spectrum. They're working on the unlicensed spectrum. So all interesting data. Data rates for 2G to 4G are shown here, going up to a gigabit per second. Give you some idea of how fast the 2G, 3G, and 4G are entering the world population in use. Obviously 2G going down, but still a substantial segment. 3G kind of still going up, and 4G, of course, growing. But let's look at it. Even if you had a gigabit per second in 4G, and you have some reasonable region, and we have all these 10 devices, 20 devices per household, if you were trying to use licensed spectrum for that, you get about 100 kilobits per second each if they're all active. They're all trying to view video, maybe for several minutes to an hour at a time. There's just not enough spectrum to really get you the speed that you want on that. And the solution, of course, is with cellular technology. We like to think of it as smaller and smaller cells, which I'm showing here. But ultimately, as you head that direction, Wi-Fi is one of the alternatives that you could have for a small cell, again, on licensed spectrum. Now, if you have Wi-Fi and you have all those small cells, you need to have a backhaul technology, if you will, of the Wi-Fi to the internet, and that's going to be a wire from the center of the cell, wherever it is in most cases. And this gives you some of the numbers worldwide on what those wires are. In terms of using existing infrastructure, obviously that's cheaper. And the number of DSL connections on a worldwide basis right now is approaching 500 million. And then you see fiber and cable at smaller numbers. So that gives you an idea, access networks, okay? So that sets the stage a little bit. How do we get to this stage, and how much does it cost to get there? Well, a typical case that you see, most telcos, it really does boil down to this simple case worldwide. If you look at 35 euros a month, there's about 8 euros in profit in there after taxes and expenses and other things. If you're running the system fairly well, that's about what you're going to be able to see. And then if you cumulatively plot that profit month to month to month, you'll see that about 3 years out, you cross 300 euros in terms of your return. And a 3-year return on access investment is about as good as it gets. Unless you're getting a very wealthy government, there aren't too many of those left in the world today, to invest in something. 3 years is a pretty reasonable, maybe the limit in terms of investment. So if it costs more than 300 euros to add a customer, it's probably not worth it to a telco service provider, an application provider, whoever is doing that. So that's the limit at about 8 euros a month in terms of profit. Recent examples, okay? Well, you see that AT&T in the United States on an iPhone sale typically subsidizes about $400. Well, that's pretty close to 300 euros, okay? There's another $100 they charge a customer, and they're expecting that they're going to get that money back over the next 3 years, and then beyond that, it becomes profit to them. If you look at Deutsche Telecom, big announcement last December 2012, that they're going to spend 300 euros per customer for 100 megabits, what's called VDSL connection, very similar to ADSL. There's just some fiber that goes part of the way to the customer. That's a viable investment. It's 20 million customers, or 6 billion euros that they're going to spend on that. They also reported the reason they didn't run fiber to everyone's home is the real cost of that is 4,000 euros per customer when it's averaged across the network. So that would have been 80 billion euros, and they couldn't afford to do that. Maybe on a different note, Sky is kind of a competitive provider. They actually provide broadband service in the UK in addition to satellite TV. They get a little higher profit because they include their satellite TV in a package, but they paid about 400 pounds per customer. It's a little bit more than 300 euros to purchase O2's assets in the UK. So this figure of a few hundred euros per customer, that's what it's worth to the telcos in terms of access networks. And that's where all the money's coming from in telecom, is those customers. So now let's look at this investment in a little more detail. Infrastructure investment. Who can afford this? Okay. Well, typically it's big telcos. Okay. You see an announcement last November from AT&T in the United States. Now, they typically spend about $20 billion a year on capital. This is acquiring, improving their network. They announced they were going to spend an additional $14 billion to increase their customer connections. $8 billion of that is going for about 20 million LTE customers, again, the $400 per customer number. Another $6 billion is going for 50 to 100 megabit vectored DSLs. Again, roughly about 300 per customer. And I mentioned the Deutsche Telekom announcement earlier. Now, these are big incumbent providers. Okay? Lots of money, lots of customers coming from that. They can afford that. If you look at LLUs, local loop unbundles, they call them here in Europe, competitive providers, the Sky purchase was about 200 million for half a million customers. So that's the level that they can invest at. And there's this thing in Europe, that phrase that's becoming common with the regulators and telcos, Highlander investment. And this goes back to a television program that I guess was popular in Europe. It's called The Highlander, where there's these deities fighting one another. Only one survives, okay, because that one finishes the show, basically. So a Highlander investment is whoever invests first, okay, gets control of the network, and everyone else has to go through them. That's what's happening, and that's some of the principles that are evolving and were just actually stated in the previous talk. Mrs. Kroes, in fact, driving some of the approach to that. But, okay, they have the money to invest, and that's trying to be encouraged. But where does the innovation come from? We've heard repeatedly today. It probably doesn't come from the large companies there. They've been government-owned for a long time, or at least government-regulated. They've developed a bureaucracy over time. Very, very difficult, even with the best of intent of all of their employees, to innovate. Innovation typically comes from smaller companies, venture capital funding, universities, so forth. It may be good recent examples of that are Google and Facebook. Maybe those are bigger companies today, but it's only been 10, 15 years. Give them some time, perhaps they'll become bureaucracies at some point also. But they've driven the demand for these networks. So you want to encourage that too. So the regulator's stuck in the middle of this in their quandary. So they'd like to encourage both. They'd like to encourage investment in those networks, build out higher speeds, do what's possible, but also to encourage the innovation in the networks. So let me talk about that a little bit, the competition and innovation. I'll leave you with my conclusion and thought here in a few slides. There was a concept that was introduced in the mid-90s, unbundling, which basically the idea here was to try to encourage competition. And what happened was the owners of the facilities, in this case I started with wireline facilities, had to lease their, in this case, copper wires to alternative service providers and essentially break the connection to the old network and put a new network in parallel with that and rent space in the telco central office and connect to the phone lines, basically, if you will. And this is what you call unbundled access. And of course, at the end of that connection is the Wi-Fi within the home. Similarly, you could think of the different license bands in mobile spectrum being a form of trying to encourage competition, essentially providing separate facilities for each of supplier A and B. Okay, very important here, different hardware for the different service providers. Okay, so now move ahead 20 years or so, but and of course, who invests in the fiber as either the antennas get closer or the copper lines get shorter and the speeds go up on this? So that's going to be the large incumbent telcos who can afford that type of investment. So now what they've decided to do in this case is to encourage what's called bitstream unbundling. For fixed line here in Europe, they call it VULA, virtual unbundled local access. And for wireless, you can think of it as an MVNO who's using the existing spectral facilities. And a competitive provider sits on top of that and rents a bitstream. And in fact, with software-defined networks, what's happening is the those competitive providers can in fact create services in software instead of hardware on top of that. But it all stops at the access equipment, and it doesn't get actually to the access into the home. And actually, if you look at the statistics, this is where all the problems are occurring, okay, in terms of transmission. When you're looking on your iPad, watching video or some other iPad device, and it's stopping, or it's taking too long, or whatever, chances are it's happening on that copper facility, or it's happening in the Wi-Fi part. It's not happening in the rest of the network. So this leaves the competitive provider with no way to differentiate. Okay, they're still dependent on the investment that's made in the facilities by the incumbent. So here's my solution or suggestion on this. The incumbents manage the network typically through SNMP connections to their access network, be it wired or wired line. And this is kind of the situation that you see today. But what you need, and in fact is now possible, I'll show you some examples, is kind of a software-defined access network. It takes that SDN concept and extends it all the way out to the consumer, involving apps on the smartphones and the tablets, involving application interfaces in the gateways, but all on the consumer side. And this is, again, where all the problems are occurring. Now, it is possible to do a bitstream lease, but when you can manage those facilities, now the over-the-tops can differentiate their services completely, as if they owned it. And it's all done in software instead of the old hardware unbundling that was done 20 years ago. So an example, let's say, if some people look at this and say, well, how can you do this without the telco having to basically bless it? Well, let me give you an example. Some of you in this room may have broadband service, and they've sold you up to 20 megabits per second, but who actually gets that? You might be getting 6 megabits per second on it. So there's extra bandwidth there that you purchase, but you're not getting. If you practice this type of software-defined access network, it's possible in many cases to get double, quadruple the speeds that are possible by doing this type of management. So now let's say you're getting 12 megabits instead of 6. They already sold you 20. They should stick by their promise, right? But this allows the over-the-top to increase the speeds. And since most of the impairments are noise within the customer's residence, whether it's a Wi-Fi interfering with other Wi-Fis, or it's the copper lines picking up interference from all types of appliances or other types of devices, if you can reduce that, you increase the speeds. So here's an example, and I'm going to play a video here, but let me explain it before I hit the play button on it, if I'm going to be able to do that with my mouse here. But the one on the left is going to use this technique, and what's going to happen is a noise interference is going to be introduced in the home environment. Two identical phone lines. These are real lines, okay? They're just brought into the same place. It's actually done on AT&T lines in California without any knowledge of AT&T of what's going on in the system, where the home noises are being managed to improve the quality. And if I'm able to hit my play button, what you'll see is this software-defined network essentially over the top fixes the problem. So hopefully, are we getting the video here? Let me try. Is it now moving? There you go. So you can actually even hear the audio on this. So there's no problem initially. But what, for example, can happen is another Wi-Fi system turns on, your neighbor's Wi-Fi, whatever, starts colliding with yours. No box, and so you can see both sides go bad here. And this is the kind of stuff that makes you drop the service, right? You get angry when you're seeing this on your pad or elsewhere. But with the software-defined system, completely over the top, and you see eventually it's figured it out, and it's cleaned up the left side. You're hearing the audio from that, where the right side continues to be garbage. So whether you're Facebook or Netflix or any other over-the-top app, that's the kind of difference you can make, all done without the service provider actually knowing about it. As long as they don't do deep packet inspection and throw off the improvement commands, and why would they want to do that? They're getting better service. You've got an improvement. Another example of the improvement from this in the UK from Ofcom, which is the regulator. Here's a quarterly reported results on the number of problems they have. And B-Sky-B is one of the more progressive groups in the UK. They are actually using techniques like this already. And you can see there the purple curve on the left. The last 3 years, their problem reports, 0 means no problems, and 1 means everybody's complaining on this scale from Ofcom, as reported by the regulator. are consistently going down. None of the other service providers have that particular capability. Some more data, actually from the UK as well, on connections, broadband connections that are having problems. It's about half and half between the copper and the Wi-Fi right now as to what's actually causing the issue on the line. So it gives you an idea. And here's another example just taken from a connection when it's running. It's supposed to be a 54 megabit Wi-Fi connection. Obviously, you never quite get to 54 megabits because of throughput, so you get about 40 megabits. Then suddenly another Wi-Fi turns on. It gets trashed in terms of its speed. It goes way down to a few megabits per second. And then the system turns on, begins to learn. Excuse me, I think the University of Bologna wants me to join their Wi-Fi network here, so let me get back to the presentation if we can. There we go. And gradually that system is learning over the top again and improving. Here's some more examples. These are lines actually in the United States, connections. These are copper connections over on the left-hand side without the software-defined access network, and then removing the noises in the home through basically MIMO techniques, a bunch of antennas, if you will, to remove noise from the phone lines. We've seen that in wireless. It's possible in wireline. And speeds, quadrupling, quintupling, so forth, over the existing speeds. So then my conclusion here on this whole area of software-defined access networks, Marconi could be very proud here. We can unleash the unlicensed spectrum with Wi-Fi and, of course, the backhauling of that. There's 500 megahertz of Wi-Fi spectrum. That's a huge amount that's out there. And if you can use these techniques, basically anyone can compete and differentiate their service. So instead of having hardware unbundling, as we saw 20 years ago, my suggestion is that go to software unbundling. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, John, for this detailed presentation about the future of software-defined networks. Now we go to our special guest, Marty Cooper. In these 3 days, and even before that, we have learned to know him and really appreciate his spirit and his attitude. And we are here now to hear the entire story of how the cell phone was invented. Marty, the floor is yours.
Giovanni, I take it I'm the last speaker?
Yes, you are.
And how much time do I have?
Anytime, all the time that you want.
Wow, what an opportunity. I always appreciate being the last speaker, as a matter of fact, because I have the opportunity.
Would you like to move around,
Oh, okay, that's good.
It's on.
I may have turned it off. Are we on? Yeah. Being the last speaker, I have the opportunity to explain to you what everybody else meant to say. So the first person I want to take to task is Vint, who's well, Vint, your remarks were really profound, and I appreciate them. But on behalf of those in the audience that may have whiter hair, I'd like you to know that passion and creativity are not only the purview of the young. And as evidence to that, I did have an idea recently. Am I still talking? Yes. Which I presented in a speech to the Federal Communications Commission, the U.S. Federal Communication Commission. I was invited by the chairwoman, and I introduced a new idea, which I will not tell you about now. But the press reported on that, and the statement was that Marty Cooper has introduced a wacky idea. I don't know how you translate that into Italian, but maybe you should listen to it because he has done some useful things in the past. So there is the possibility for people with white hair to come up with something new. And perhaps it's not a wacky idea, and those of you that are interested, martin.cooper.com, and tell me what you think of the idea. I want to talk a bit about how Marconi inspired me. Because Marconi had some huge obstacles. He had some advantages. He did have the opportunity to operate in spectrum that was basically interference-free because there was nobody else transmitting. And so when I started examining the issue of how much spectrum do we need today, I looked at what Marconi did 100 years ago and started to do some extrapolation. And I discovered that the ability to put information through radio waves has doubled every 2.5 years for the past 110 years. Anybody that knows how to do the mathematics know that comes out to 10 trillion times improvement. There is no reason to believe that that can't continue for the indefinite future, and that turns out to be a lucky thing, because as John pointed out, we need that capacity. There have been a number of projections of what kind of capacity that we are going to need in the future. They all come out to, in the next 5 years, we are going to need something like 20 to 40 times increase in total capacity. So yes, we are going to need Wi-Fi because that's going to essentially double the capacity, but we're still going to run out of capacity if we don't increase the capacity of Wi-Fi and of our other networks. And just to give you an example, just sending your EKG, a picture of what your heart is doing, which is going to be an important part of the healthcare revolution, will take about as much capacity on the system as all the other communications that you are doing today, all the voice and data communications. And that's just one application. So we are going to need a ton of increased capacity. But there's another observation that also John pointed out, is can we afford to do all these things? And so I did another extrapolation. I looked at what Marconi charged for transmitting information through the network. And I discovered a really interesting fact that some politician in the early 19th century decided to send a message to the French consulate. This is an American politician, and he was going to be creative, and he sent it by radio, transatlantic. And he was a wordy guy, and sometime shortly thereafter, the bill came back. And the bill was bigger than the salary of the President of the United States at that time, so you had a person in trouble. And I did an extrapolation of what it cost to send a bit of information through the radio network in Marconi's time coming up to now. And interestingly enough, it has halved every 3.5 years. So instead of a 10 trillion times increase in data speed, we now have a 1 trillion times decrease in cost. And we are going to need that if, in fact, we are going to do the kinds of things that I talked about in my earlier talk. By the way, is there anybody here that didn't hear that? I know, Francesco, you didn't. Anybody else that didn't hear the first? You didn't. Well, I'll give you a private session. I just want you to know, I thought there were going to be more people, so I stayed up late last night trying to do a 1 minute recap of what I said, and I actually succeeded, but I'm not going to do it for you now. But what I want to do now is part 2 of my original speech. If you recall, I talked to you about the 3 revolutions that we're going to have in education, healthcare, and social networking. And I only talked about healthcare very briefly. I want to spend a little bit more time telling you about what I think is going to happen, actually making some predictions about what is going to happen and when it's going to happen. Where are we today with wireless healthcare? there are actually some things happening. Interesting enough, the most interesting things that are happening are in third world countries. So in Mexico today, there are doctors who are examining the eyes of people in villages using an ordinary smart cell phone and a little device that clips onto the camera of the cell phone. And so a person can look at this device through the cell phone camera, transmit the information, and the doctor can analyze the person's eyes and treat eye diseases. That's actually happening today. And this little optical device, it costs, at least in quantity, the order of $5. Cost is not an issue. There's another experiment also going on in Mexico where a device, a fetal measurement device that works ultrasonically can be applied to a pregnant woman, and a doctor can do an analysis, once again, remotely. So a woman in a small village in Mexico can be treated by a doctor in the big city at much, much lower cost and solving a really serious problem. Even in the developed countries, there are some things happening. There are services, as an example, that apply to compliance. One of the big problems with medicine today is the doctor prescribes something to somebody and says, take these pills and take one a day for a month. And of course, the patient takes the pills, and after a few days feels much better. They don't take the rest of the prescription, and 3 weeks later they're back in the hospital, and you know who pays for that hospital visit. All of us do. How do you solve that? Well, one way is keep reminding people to take their pills. Is that 100% possible? Maybe not, but it does encourage people to do that. In the future, the pills themselves are going to report whether they've been taken. And that technology actually exists today. There are pills now that have a super miniature transmitter in them that doesn't get activated until the pill gets into your stomach and your acid dissolves the pill, and the doctor knows that you have taken your pill. There are today systems that allow people to, if they have a medical problem, to call a nurse. And it's a very nominal cost, and the nurse can give them some advice. Not going to treat their medical problems, but help them in some useful kind of way. That kind of a service exists today. So we're starting to learn how to do this sort of thing. But the exciting part of the future is what can happen when we put these sensors on people that measure all of our vital signs. And what kind of sensors am I talking about? Well, we already know today how to do an EKG, an EEG. We can measure oxygen saturation. We can measure skin temperature. We can measure the resistance of your skin and all kinds of other things. With all of that information, it's possible to do an enormous amount of diagnosis. So I want to skip ahead there, and first of all, to tell you what the problems are that keep us from using all of this information and started to do that today. I mean, I'm talking about technology that exists now, not future technology. Well, first of all, we have to decide who owns this information about you. Who do you think owns the information about what your heart, skin, oxygen content, all of these things? Who owns that information? Anybody want to take a guess? At the moment, if you did it, have your doctor do that, he thinks he owns that information. If you go to the hospital, they think they own it. Well, we have a law in the United States now that says that the individual can have access to all the information. The way it should be is you own that information. You decide who can see it and who cannot see it. We have to learn how, first of all, to implement that. Not very easy, because I've been trying to get information from my own hospital, And our law requires them to put this information on in technical form. And what they sent me was a stack of paper about this thick, which is essentially useless to me. So there's a lot of work to be done on that. We have to make sure that this information is secure. One thing we don't want is to have our information in electronic form and accessible to other people. There are a couple of problems which you may not have in Italy, like having to do with the lawyers. Any lawyers here? I don't want to offend any. Oh, yeah. Please don't be offended when I say this. But one of the big problems we have in the States is liability. Doctors are actually afraid to take some actions because if things go wrong, they get sued. And yet, one of the things we've been learning at this conference is it's hard to be creative, hard to reach out if you fear failure. And so we have to solve that problem. All of these problems are going to get solved. So here's where I make my predictions. It's my belief that in the next 10 to 15 years, there will be the application of a computer that's very much like IBM's Watson. You know that Watson has already beaten the best chess player in the world, has beaten the best Jeopardy players in the world. But I'm talking about 10 or 15 years from now, a Watson that is 10 times more powerful than the existing one, and perhaps more so. I will then talk about sensors, very simplified ones. So you only have one or two sensors that measure all of the things that I talked about, plus a couple of additional ones. The first one that will appear that has enormous value is a glucose measurement. Today, I don't know if there's anybody that's diabetic here, but you have to take a blood sample. You have to actually prick your finger, take a blood sample, put it on a piece of paper, and put it into some kind of an analyzer. And it's going to be very difficult to get over that. Not only technically, but think about it, those little slips of paper that go into the analysis are now a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's going to be a little hard to get people to give that business up. But that's going to happen. The next thing that's going to happen after that, in 20 to 30 years, is there will be sensors available that will be able to sense a few cancer cells. So in 15 years, we're going to start accumulating information. We're going to have the order of millions of people transmitting their data into this big Watson, and Watson, Dr. Watson, is going to start analyzing all of this data. It's all going to have the health history of these people. It's going to integrate all of this information. 10 years beyond that, we're going to be up to 100 million people. Now, this computer is going to start figuring out for a given set of information, for a given set of symptoms, these are the diseases that are starting to happen, not diseases that already have occurred. Remember, the thing that I asked everybody to remember was all diseases are actionably preventable. If you catch the disease early enough before it becomes a disease, you never even become aware of it. It's going to take 25 to 30 years before we accumulate enough of this data so that we can start telling people not some average number that is the normal. I don't know if you've ever looked at when they measure things on your body and they say, you're normal. And then you look at the range of what normal is, and it's so huge that it includes almost everything. It has nothing to do with you. We are going into an age of personalized, customized medicine where Dr. Watson is going to figure out exactly what's happening to you. It's going to anticipate your diseases before they happen, and disease will be essentially wiped out. 35 to 40 years. I'm not certain that all of us will be there. I know that the Marconi scholars will be there. And when they see this happening, they are going to remember that Marty told them all about it. So thank you very much.
like to take advantage of this wonderful panel. Thank you very much, Marty, for this additional wonderful speech, and open the floor for questions. So you have the opportunity to ask questions to this panel. So let's see who dares. Please, Eugene, you can start. Eugene Soboski, just wait for the microphone for a second.
It is good and a natural thing that in this symposium we are making emphasis on positive achievements of innovation in telecommunications. But perhaps in the next conference we could take a broader view and also talk about the costs of this progress and innovation. We know, for instance, that our closed space is increasingly littered with technological garbage. And if it goes on like that, then the prediction is that in about 15 years, our extraterrestrial activity will have to come to a stop. So what I suggest that perhaps in the next conference, along with talking about creativity and innovation, we also talk about how to divert part of this creativity into thinking of how to make this progress more environmentally friendly.
It's more a comment than a question. Of course, I can turn it on if anybody wants to comment on that back. But we said that sustainability is one of the main requirements for anything we do today. So we definitely agree with you. And although in general we have taken a positivistic approach to progress, we all understand that there's always a negative side. And the technology can be used well or can be used in a bad way also. So one thing is to provide the means for communication, the means for connectivity, and then what the human species will do that, it's another problem. Constantijn, please.
Yeah, we don't need to go to space. We don't need to go to telephony to look at the garbage that we're producing and that is clogging up our oceans and all that. But actually yesterday the European Parliament agreed on the single standard for chargers. And this is actually a question I'd like to put back to you, because it's a dilemma. You come with a single charger, so it's now you got the mini USB would be the single charger plug. Which helps because now, I mean, everybody has their cupboards full of chargers with all kinds of plugs that you no longer use. But there's innovation in plugs too. So now we set this. Let's say we set this charge now. It means that we need to have adapters for Apple, because Apple doesn't use USB. And actually, they are maybe right so, because they are innovating in these plugs. So where do we need to support innovation, and where do we block it by setting a standard, and where does this maybe the environmental or sustainability argument trump that? Because we know once we got the standard, it's going to be very hard to get rid of it.
Actually, the problem with standards is that there's too many of them. So I know that I carry 45 pounds worth of stuff in my briefcase to cope with all the various alternative electrical power sockets. One obvious thing is to go to wireless. That's why wireless recharging is a very attractive possibility. Right now, you can't do it over a very large distance. You certainly don't want to walk in between the inductor coil and the device that you're recharging if it's of any significant power. But the other thing that occurs to me that would save cost would be changing the way in which we allocate spectrum. Right now we do really stupid things by allocating spectrum in narrow slices, and we assume that we have really stupid receivers. Although I'm not capable of regenerating some of the remarks that I've heard in the FCC, the Technology Advisory Committee points out that for many years the spectrum allocation was based on the assumption that you had a very poor quality receiver, and that meant you had to have an extremely smart transmitter that narrowed the use of the spectrum to only the band that it was supposed to be used in. What would happen if we opened up much broader chunks of spectrum and used really smart receivers to distinguish one signal from another? There must be a dozen or more people sitting in this room that are capable of designing systems that would allow much more broadband sharing. If you put a radiometer out and listen for a while in the normally used radio spectrum, you only see about 2% of it used at any moment, which is a terrible waste. So there surely is a better way to do that.
Well, I wonder if I could expand on what Vint just said, because I talked about the fact that we are going to have a trillion times more spectral efficiency, more information going through the spectrum over the next 50 years or so. How is that going to happen? Well, Vint just pointed out, if we are very, very inefficient on how we do almost everything today, and especially how we use the radio waves. So, and it's very easy to project how we should be doing it. When you do a transaction, when you make a phone call over the radio, or when you exchange some data, if you only used the amount of bandwidth that you need, not anymore. Right now, when you turn your cell phone on, you use a block of spectrum. Suppose that we had a system where you only use just what you need, you only use it over the geography that you need. So if I'm talking to David, I occupy a piece of the spectrum around me and a piece around you, and the rest of the spectrum is available to everybody else. If you only do it through the time that you need it, but when you're not using it, somebody else can use it. And finally, if you use the piece of the radio spectrum that's best suited to the communication. So if I'm literally talking to you, David, I could be talking at a 1,000 gigahertz, and we have very good communication because it's line of sight. If I'm talking to somebody on the other side of Bologna, maybe I have to be talking at 450 megahertz. So if you can pick the particular area of spectrum and you do all of these other things, how much more efficient do you think it will be? Well, remarkably, it comes out to about 1 trillion times more effective. And we are learning how to do every single thing that I talked about. So these are not pipe dreams. These are things that are really going to happen.
Just to give you a local information about Italy, Marconi Foundation and the Fondazione Bordoni are trying in our country to do a spectrum review, which is before the adaptive use of the spectrum, in order to recognize where we are using, not in the best way, our spectrum. We have many, many places where it is possible to do best, and also, of course, but in the field of research, this activity is done in order to have adaptive tools, white spaces, and so on, in order to improve the efficiency in the sense you said.
If I could just comment on that, that was what we just talked about. We have Wi-Fi spectrum, as I mentioned, 500 megahertz of it, and that's exactly what was done in the example, was using space and time to basically make a more efficient use of that there. So that's already a nice swath. It would be great if we had, as Vint said, another 500 megahertz and could use it that way as well. But we do have one already that's greatly underutilized today.
So question by Bob Kahn, please.
Yeah, this is for Constantijn. You talked about essentially leveraging the creativity and innovation in Europe for the benefit of Europe. You kind of alluded to, other competitors. There were some comments about the U.S. In a recent issue of The Economist, they were pointing out, in their view, that Europe seemed to be in economic decline, the U.S. was barely holding its own, and that China and some other East Asian countries were in the ascendancy. You didn't mention anything about China at all. And what is your sense of where China fits into the kind of things that you're trying to do to essentially improve the ability of Europe to provide products and services? And what does that hold for the future of the industry that's now essentially, in their view, either holding their own or in descendant in the West?
Yeah, well, you can't cover everything. No. China is obviously very often at the front and the back of the mind. Well, we look at our equipment makers. They're competing obviously with Chinese, and we have actually now doing an investigation into anti-dumping practices by certain competitors in China. And so we're seeing that the Chinese are becoming, well, really, really powerful players. They're much better financed. If we look at ZTE, I think they have 20 billion a year to spend for their international expansion. So China is for many of the policymakers or politicians in Europe seen as a threat. So when we try to remove regulation or create more European markets, then people immediately say, well, then the Chinese may come, and well, we also say the Americans, so and the Americans also, but they're coming to buy up our assets, and these are critical infrastructure, and we need to protect them. And that language about protection is not very strong yet, but you feel it. It's politicians don't typically like to see their incumbent operators move into foreign hands. We've seen in the Netherlands. We have now a debate with Mexicans coming in. So it's more about what happens if foreign companies come and shop around in Europe. I think that's one of the elements. The other big point, obviously, is security, where we have also discussions with our American friends who consider that we are relatively naive in the way that our operators are all buying Chinese products, whereas the US has actually forbid it. So AT&T comes to us and complains that they are subsidizing European equipment makers because they're buying at a premium just because the US has disallowed them to buy Chinese stuff, which they think is probably a good thing because they don't trust Chinese either. Which is, and for a policymaker, it's very hard to deal with. We can't fully grasp what the technology and the security risk is. There's not enough there to make to install protective measures. So we're still looking at this on the one hand as also for our equipment providers as an opportunity. China is a huge opportunity, is a huge market. And we're looking with some with the Americans, I think, very closely to what the security aspects of all of this is. China further, I mean, and this is, and actually with we can mention a company with Huawei, we talk as well, and they come to us because they consider that Europe has a kind of a common interest because they consider that America has all the platforms, and then they are concerned that the Chinese government might want to go on its own, create its own standards, and they sometimes lobby us to say we have to join forces to make sure that we all embrace global standards, and so the game is a very odd one, and I wouldn't say that we have a completely defined strategy how to deal with this, how to deal with these companies as commercial operators that work in a free market, in a free global market, and on the other hand, how we relate to the more geostrategic issues around that in our relationship with the Chinese.
So is it fair to say that the strategy is basically defensive? As I heard your comments, that's sort of the main theme I got out of it. The way to succeed is by having stronger defensive.
Well, I'd say anti-dumping policies are offensive. That's, but in general, there is not a strategy yet, I think, that would be defensive, but the tendency would be defensive.
Yes, I was interested in your comments on software-defined networking. I've been following this over the last period of time, and I noticed that there was a tendency of a little lack of clarity in terminology. And that, being a lawyer, that's something that's always of concern, because when you try to write laws or you try to even develop standards, even technical standards, it means many different things to different people. Specifically, software, which I'm viewing as program. And there's a recent group was discussing software versus data transport port, which we're distinguishing between something called data management. Now, I was looking at software and data as simply assembled symbolic logic, and it's artificial labels. But what was more troubling is I was looking at transport as a type of operation you could perform on the set of sequences of bits, which is essentially what you're looking at here at an operational level. Have you had struggled with this issue of terminology?
I think everyone is struggling with that in SDN because it's a relatively recent development. There are a number of forums that have been developed that in different companies promoting different ways of handling it, and it hasn't been as well defined as perhaps it could be in this area. So you're not alone in trying to figure that out, but some of the concepts that you've described, the data versus the management, are starting to fall out. The software defined network is really thought of as transport level and above. If you're familiar with the 7-layer OSI model, that may be too technical for here, but and these separation of basically the network functions from the applications through the use of software to do that. My point in the talk was simply that had not been extended to the access part of the network, and that may be the most important part because that's where all the money is and it's where all the problems are that differentiate the services.
If you permit me just to continue one step further. Having grown up and working with Vint and Bob for years and years now on the internet, and I'm stepping back from layers and levels because you stumble a lot over that. And it's the assembled symbolic logic represented in digital form, the bits. And so I was at a meeting last March where they were talking about over the top, and then there was a whole group talking, no, it's under the top. Oh, no, it's whatever. So I said, bits are bits, folks, over, under, whatever, especially in an internet environment where you want to have a more integrated management structure. And so that would permit, perhaps, what you were talking about, managing spectrum as managing information, treating it just as information at some level, it's information about it, to have a more integrated approach. That was really my end thought here.
Yeah, I think that's a nice summary, actually. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but you correctly described it that way. I like that description.
Oh, good, thanks.
I actually wanted to ask a question for young scholars here. We mentioned earlier that all inventors and creators have to face resistance and irony. So I wanted to ask if you could share personal experiences of what helped you live through those and keep working on what you were passionate about.
Who takes on this wonderful question?
All right, I'll try. The honest answer to this is that, for me anyway, engineering is about solving problems, and it's about sometimes, translating science fiction into reality. What I think is most important is that you really want to solve the problem. And for me, all the tasks that I've ever taken on have had this kernel of, this problem is not going to beat me, I'm going to beat the problem. And I don't care how long it takes to get there. And if you can infuse that same attitude in enough other people, eventually the problem gets solved, even if you're not the one that solves it.
Okay, further question?
I'd like to ask a question, actually, to everybody, but maybe the EU view too. We've all heard about the growth of traffic demand and the need for growth in capacity, which is lagging, and how much it's all going to cost. The question is, who's going to pay for it, both in the growth of the wireless capacity, but even more so in the subject that's dear to my heart, the optical fiber capacity, which is carrying more than 90% of all data. Where the advances have been made, they've in the Far East, in China, where subscribers are getting far greater capacities. That's been achieved with greater government subsidy in Japan as well. Perversely, where there's been more competition, like in the UK, one of the most freed up markets, the growth has been very slow because no incumbent operator has been willing to make the investment, which is after all very large. And yet, again, we have evidence that growth of the internet stimulates the digital economy, contributes to GDP, contributes to creativity. So how much subsidy should there be, and who should be paying for this growth and capacity?
Should be paying, that sounds like a value judgment. Could be playing is, I think, the first, could be playing and could be paying is, I think, probably the first question. Well, there are different models. Obviously, rural areas you might find subsidies, and in Europe we have structural funds for that can actually support that. We proposed something, a fund that could be leveraged through the European Investment Bank, but that was killed as an idea. That would have generated about 70 billion for European rollout of European broadband infrastructure. I think the case for fourth generation mobile is in itself much better because it's a much cheaper auxiliary to manage, and so that will, as long as governments are fast enough in auctioning off, because it's still the way they do it. I mean, unlicensed spectrum is great, but it's not the way governments seem to work, especially not in times of austerity, because it's an interesting way of getting some quick cash and sucking it out of the innovation system. But that's just a private opinion. And so we see actually where spectrum is auctioned, the LTE rollout is pretty fast. So that's not so much the problem. But on fixed, in Europe the model as we've chosen is that the incumbents are the ones that should pay. And as you're right, where there's competition, the prices go down, and they are complaining that they don't have enough revenues to make the investment. What we've been fighting as an argument is that rent seeking as such is not the best business model to fund infrastructure. In fact, we haven't seen much evidence that it actually has happened, because we have rents in roaming or international calls. International calls would be intra-European calls, so you're calling across a border that we try to remove in Europe because we have a single market, but your wallet will notice that you've actually dialed someone who's on the other side of this which should be virtual border or non-existing border, and that's something that we think is politically untenable if you have an internal market. So we say, so that's one, and roaming is the other, and then you have the protected national markets that provide certain rents, guaranteed rents to the incumbents. We think what we should do is give them the opportunity to benefit from much larger markets, to move toward more either specialized services or more have data-driven business models, whereas most of it in the pricing models are still voice-oriented. So it's creating the opportunities, making sure that the regulatory framework doesn't block these opportunities, but on the other hand, trying to move them away from the kind of rent-seeking models that really have been spent on dividends and share buybacks and these kind of things to prop up share prices, and are not sustainable in the long run.
If I could comment on that one also, I think there's ultimately it's the consumer that pays. If it's the government subsidizing, it's coming out of your tax dollars, so that comes from you. And when the consumer's ready to pay more than 35 euros a month, then you'll see more infrastructure moving faster. But when the consumer doesn't demand that, it doesn't matter whether they're paying it directly or it's a tax. And for example, I'll give you Australia. They just had an election about 2 weeks ago where the Prime Minister was thrown out of office because he was spending too much on broadband, and the people didn't want to spend that much of their precious tax dollar that direction. So ultimately, it's all of us. When we say we're willing to pay, we'll get more. And right now, it's a few tens of euros or dollars a month is what we're all willing to pay for that service. Some people may be willing to pay a few hundred, but there are exceptions. And so you don't see the pervasive use of these other technologies until the demand is really there and people are ready to pay for it.
So there's a different way to think about this. You guys sound like you're talking about Shannon's theorem, where there's a center and why do you keep turning it off? Okay. Somebody else is doing it. Stop that. This is a good example of a channel that has 100% interference because it can just shut you off. Shannon talks about a sender and receiver and somebody who interferes in between. The business models you're talking about make me think the same way, a buyer and seller. That's not necessarily the only business model. Google has demonstrated that beautifully because we have users who get free services and we have customers who pay us. And that's the difference, except it's a three-way arrangement. In this case, it's advertising. I'm not arguing that advertising is the solution to everything, but I do think we should not confine ourselves to thinking about the buyer and seller model exclusively. There may be some additional ones. And while I'm still have the microphone functioning, I hate auctions. I think it's a dumb idea. The right thing to do is to open the spectrum up and let people invent all kinds of ways to use it, invent new businesses, generate lots of revenue, produce tax dollars, and that's a lot better income than a one-shot at the sale of a bit of spectrum.
Well, I really would like to stir up some trouble because I want to go back to your question. Should the government subsidize? Absolutely not. What's the role of the government? Is to make sure that there is a level playing field so that everyone has access to the spectrum. Because what I tried to express before, and obviously didn't do a very good job, was we are so inefficient at how we do everything now that if we create a competitive environment and have a level playing field, the costs are going to go down. We should not require people to pay more than 35 euros for whatever the service is, and the service is going to keep increasing and increasing, and it ought to stay at 35 because that's what they can afford. But we are so inefficient now that there's no reason why in a competitive environment we're not going to learn how to do all of these new services at the same price.
Excuse me. To remind that there is always a role of the government, the role of giving the opportunity to have this connection to everybody. So now we are confronted with the digital divide, and this will be always present in the progress of the communication. So this is a role, and we know that in this particular role, the government must do something, since we have experienced that the market cannot arrive everywhere. This is already established.
Okay, Andre, please.
I'm always interested to know what drives creativity and innovation. It strikes me that all too regularly, perhaps rather sadly, military issues tend to drive it. Back 35, 40 years ago, when I was still an engineer, I recall the invention of frequency hopping radio, which was a process where the frequency that you transmitted on changed on an unpredictable and irregular basis. And it was actually generated so that for military use, you couldn't easily track it if you were trying to hear what was going on over those passages. It strikes me that that kind of invention might be appropriate for better use of our bandwidth. In other words, if we were able to use little bits of bandwidth that somebody wasn't using for a few packets of information and then switch to another frequency that was not being used and that kind of thing, we could start to get a better use of our bandwidth. But I wonder what the panel thinks, how if we had some kind of an innovation, whether it's that or something else, how can we be sure in the future that there is open access to that kind of technology, and that those technological inventions that will make a dramatic difference to our use of the availability of the internet in the future, how can we make sure that they're not kind of cornered and that we don't inadvertently managed to destroy the competitive issue that we now enjoy.
Can I just observe that a company called Qualcomm makes a telephone system that uses spectrum communications. It happens to be code division multiple access, what you described as frequency hopping, which was invented back during World War II. So the fact of the matter is that's accessible and used today. It's just that we don't have enough spectrum allocated to using it that way. And I think, from my point of view, if we just broaden access to the spectrum, we could make exactly that thing work better.
Well, Vint, you're not exactly right, because I think we've got lots of spectrum.
Say again?
I think that we have lots of spectrum available. I just don't think we use it very well.
Well,
and we already are using, as you pointed out, CDMA. And there are, in fact, we're already using, there's a new system called LTE, fourth generation, that's using even more advanced technology than that. And if we keep doing that, I don't happen to agree with Vint in this one regard. We would agree on almost everything else. So. But we don't really need more spectrum. We need to have more efficient use of the spectrum. We really know how to do these things. It is not in the interest of all the parties involved to use the most advanced technology, but they're going to be forced to do it just because there are so many applications that require this. It's the efficiency of use that will solve the cost problem, and it will solve the demand problem. The fact that we are creative. I don't know who it is that you think is going to constrain this from happening. Somehow I sense you think that there's a military-industrial complex that gets hold of technology, keeps other people from getting it. I'm naive enough to think that that doesn't exist, that the technology somehow gets out in the world. If we do have a problem, it is our patent problem. We do have people that are using patents in ways that they weren't intended to happen, and that is a problem.
It's your invention, getting back to it.
I don't know why I take that personally. So the patent situation is a problem in the sense of people using patents in ways that they weren't intended to be. But I don't think the military issue is a very important one.
Okay, we need to converge to the end. Oh, please, Constantijn.
I was just wondering why you blame Martin for grown-up silliness, because it's always it's the ringtone is something which hides our secret selves. We put suits on and ties, and then we have either it's your kids that put the ringtone on your phone, which is highly embarrassing. But it's always like in meetings like this when somebody gets confronted with his or her stupidity when they were sitting at home and thought they were so cool and putting Lady Gaga on their phone. and then they get exposed, it's like putting a spotlight on them. And I'm sorry, but you can't blame Marty for that.
Okay, two more quick questions, please. One, okay.
I'm very curious to hear why you think that IT increases creativity. Certainly a lot of creativity goes into advancing IT, but do the users really get more creative by using IT? I will try to come up with a counter argument. IT uses and enforces a lot of standardization. So, for instance, now we have Google's knowledge graph, and eventually maybe all of us will adapt our searches so that it fits into how the knowledge graph of Google models the world. So that's not just convergent thinking, that's converged thinking. We all somehow live in the same model of the universe at one point. And then we're all in the center. Nobody's at the periphery anymore. Everybody's connected, and we all have the same worldview. I'm just making up a counter argument. That would mean we have a lot of standardization, and then maybe less divergent thinking, and therefore less creativity on the side of the users. So I'm curious to hear why I'm wrong with that argument, counter argument, and why we actually have more creativity when we have more IT.
So if the argument is that standardization harms creativity, I disagree on the following grounds. Standardization creates opportunities for innovation. That's why when you create a standard, you create something that will allow things to interwork and interoperate. And when you do that, like the case of the internet, you create a platform on top of which people innovate. That's where the World Wide Web came from. That's where all the applications that sit on top of the World Wide Web come from. There are standard interfaces and standard protocols that guarantee the interoperability and therefore lead to all kinds of competition and innovation above that level.
Thank you very much. John, last question.
Thank you. There's such a push to improve the bottom line, and I can appreciate and understand that. I think there's opportunities for companies to make money by creating or manufacturing or designing extremely affordable products to serve the poor. And I'm struggling sometimes to get companies to see that as an opportunity for people to make money. So I'm wondering, are there some discussions with regard to national policy to encourage organizations to complement their business models with other business models so that they also create products that are extremely affordable for this population?
Well, governments that start interfering with business models is it's also a bit tricky. I don't think the business model of government is a very efficient one. We just heard that we're only using 1% of the spectrum because of inefficient government intervention. So, but having said that, I think the notion of frugal innovation and those kind of things are really powerful, and it's something that in our development programs we have to use much more. Actually, it makes a lot of sense because we pay far too much for gadgets. I think GE actually developed pumps and other measurement devices for poor countries, and they found that they actually had all the functionalities that we need in the West, and you could actually, for very cheap, you could have decentralized medicine and all that, which we couldn't have because the devices that we're used to are big, chunky, and have a lot of buttons and a lot of functions that we don't need. So I think in our research programs we might be I think we should focus more on developing those functionalities that make sense and are affordable, and maybe pushing. Because I think right at the beginning you said something about barriers creating innovation or blocking innovation. I think if you have, I think barriers are really good for innovation, because if you push people to the barriers, then they'll start getting creative to work around it. And I think if you, in our research programs, instead of always trying to develop the pie in the sky, it might be good to develop something that is really cheap but good. So Necropontus, for instance, initiative, I think was a really good one, because it is just as big a challenge to make a computer that is very cheap and still can do a lot than to make a very expensive device that can do more.
Okay, thank you very much, and please join me in giving a big hand for the panel. Before we leave, just two things. The first of all, it's an information tonight. You're coming to the gala dinner. The buses will leave at 6 p.m. in front of the Hotel Majestic, Via Indipendenza. So please be there by 6 o'clock. Buses will leave at 6:15, and there will be no other chance. So please be there at 6. Now, this is a conference on creativity. One of the most effective creativity methods is that of reversing the way you do things conventionally. So at the end of the panel, at the end of the open questions, we will have the welcome remarks from the city of Bologna. In representation of the mayor of the city, we have here Matteo Lepore, and he will give us the salute from Bologna. Please, Matteo, take the podium over there.
Okay. Only a few words, because in Italy we have an important tradition after a good debate, and I enjoy really much this panel. The tradition is to eat too much. So you need time to do that. And yeah, I'm really glad to be here, really glad to be here for to share our happiness, the happiness of the city. Bologna is really honored to have this important conference here in Bologna. And first of all, I would like to thank Marconi Institute, the Foundation, and Marconi Society. It's really important to have important professors, scholars, and obviously Martin Cooper here. For us, it's really important to have this important occasion in our city. Some weeks ago, we we host a conference on creativity. 34 creative cities recognized by UNESCO were here in Bologna for a week. And in the same week, our university hosts the Magna Carta 25th anniversary. Magna Carta Universitatum, an important document among different universities. And in this week, we had, I think, 1,000 of students and professors also in our city. And Umberto Eco, the writer and professor, did an important lecture at university on the role of university. The question was, why university? And starting from the media revolution, he used a paradox to describe his vision. 7 billion citizens in the world and 7 billion languages, different languages. With a smartphone, you can create what you want, design, create a language, create new products. And he thought that university and cities together with humanities and technologies could create dialogue between these 7 billion people. And I think it's important to contribute to technology, to the invention of new technology. And I think in this message, you can find the role of creativity, not only the role of innovation. I think creativity is based on knowledge, is based on people. And connecting people, I think, is the role of cities and universities. So connecting people is an abused slogan, but I think it's good for Bologna and also for your adventure. So thank you very much. And
now it's really time for lunch, and I was told that this time, if you want, you can go to the terrace. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Today, live streaming also. You're talking with me live streaming today. Yes. I didn't know that was what you were planning. That would be great.
Personal remark on options. If you allow me, I'll send you I think I'm good. We checked it yesterday. I think that's okay. Whatever you say. You never. I don't know what happens, but okay. Maybe it will work. If not, we'll do the microphone thing. Okay. So you switch it off and just. I have this piece of paper on me if somebody wants it. It's just scribbled. Well, I 15 years ago, he was crazy about it. I mean, I just wrote it. Whatever. Now in the 8. And I'll send you. Now in the 8, yeah. It's from 2. European cloud goes beyond European alliance. The idea of European digital sovereignty, the idea of having our own cloud, which obviously is a highly political issue, but we try to stay away from that. I know. This is very clear because it creates problems. But I mean, well, we don't think it's in line with also the architecture we start creating kind of national. Yes. Yeah, the problem is that then someone else does it, and someone else does it, and they might do it in marketing.